Welcome to Forge Conversations. I'm Alain Coadou. I study what happens when human beings remain under pressure for too long. Many leaders begin deteriorating long before anyone notices, including themselves. Performance can remain externally high, while regulation quietly erodes underneath. This series explores each movement of the Forge framework, a framework built for those who continue functioning externally while something inside gradually fragments under sustained pressure. Today, we begin with the first movement. The letter F. F stands for focus. And focus is not about productivity. It is about recovering the ability to recognize what truly deserves your presence. Let's start with something familiar. It is Monday morning. You came back late from a weekend trip. Your phone has been charging all night. You unlock it, and within a few seconds you see a message about a budget decision that cannot wait, a scheduling conflict for Thursday, an email from your child's school, a frustrated text from a team member, a news alert about a competitor, a reminder that your performance review is overdue. 6 inputs, 5 seconds. Now here is the real question. Can your mind immediately identify which one genuinely deserves your full attention first? For many people under chronic pressure, the answer is no. And that matters more than it seems. Your brain is designed to create hierarchy. It normally distinguishes automatically between signal and noise, between the strategic and the trivial, between what threatens the system and what merely interrupts it. But under sustained organizational pressure, something begins to change. What I often observe in leaders experiencing drift is what I call the urgency trap. The cognitive hierarchy starts flattening. Everything begins competing at the same frequency. The important and the incidental start feeling strangely equivalent. A board-level strategic issue and an administrative email land in the same place internally, with the same emotional weight, the same sense of urgency. Think of an old graphic equalizer, the kind with sliders for each frequency band. A healthy system has contrast. Certain signals stand out, others remain in the background. Under chronic pressure, it is as if every slider is slowly pushed to the same height. Everything plays at maximum volume. The music becomes noise. Biologically, this makes sense. When the prefrontal cortex remains under continuous load without enough recovery, its ability to prioritize and filter begins to weaken. Attention becomes diffuse. Reactivity increases. You are no longer truly leading, you are reacting to everything. And over time, something even deeper can happen. Many leaders stop organizing their attention from the inside. Their hierarchy slowly becomes outsourced to urgency itself. The inbox decides. The notifications decide. The loudest pressure decides. Attention is no longer directed consciously. It becomes captured. And the dangerous part is that externally, everything may still appear functional. Targets are met, meetings continue, performance metrics remain acceptable. But internally, something essential starts disappearing, the ability to feel what actually matters. I once worked with a plant director in the automotive industry. 14 years of experience, strong performer, highly respected. I asked him a simple question. What are your 3 real priorities for this quarter? He gave me 11. Then he laughed, and then he became very quiet. At some point, he had stopped being able to feel the difference between what was strategic and what was simply loud. That is drift. And focus is the first movement out of it. What interests me most is that focus is not primarily a time management problem, it is an attentional problem. There is a moment I often witness during coaching sessions. A leader speaks for 20 or 30 minutes. Projects, conflicts, decisions, pressures, coming from every direction. The words are coherent, the analysis is intelligent, but internally, everything is being held at the same altitude. And then suddenly we find it, the fixed point. The one thing that genuinely deserves their presence beneath all the surrounding noise. And when that happens, something changes physically. The breathing slows, the shoulders drop slightly, the eyes stop scanning, they land. The pressures themselves have not disappeared, but the hierarchy has returned. I remember a hotel manager who described living with what he called a permanent background anxiety. It had been there for so long that he no longer questioned it. Eventually, during the focus work, he identified the real issue, a conversation he had been avoiding for months because he knew it would be difficult. And the moment he named it, he said something I have never forgotten. I think I've been anxious about everything because I was avoiding being anxious about one specific thing. That is what focus restores, not simplicity, clarity. The signal comes back. The noise remains, but it returns to the background where it belongs. And something important and uncomfortable lives inside that process. Sometimes the noise is not only exhausting, sometimes it is protective. Because as long as everything feels urgent, we never have to confront the one thing we already know matters most. Fragmentation can become a way of avoiding clarity, a way of staying in motion, so we never have to fully meet what is waiting underneath the motion. And this is why focus is not always immediately comforting. Because the moment the signal finally emerges, denial becomes harder, incoherence becomes visible, certain decisions can no longer be postponed internally. Clarity is not always relief. Sometimes it is the moment we can no longer pretend not to know. One client once described it this way. It's like I had 17 windows open on my laptop. I finally closed 14 of them. That image stayed with me because it captures something important. Focus is not about becoming faster, it is about stopping unnecessary cognitive leakage. In the first episode, I used another image I want to revisit here. Watch beginners learning to juggle in a circus school. Their eyes chase every object individually. Their breathing becomes shallow, their shoulders rise, the whole body becomes reactive. Because attention is fragmented across too many moving targets, the system eventually collapses. Now watch the instructor. Same number of balls, same speed. But the body is different. The breathing is calm, the shoulders stay relaxed, and most importantly, the eyes are almost still. The instructor is not tracking each ball. He fixes his gaze on one stable point slightly above the movement. Everything else organizes around that point. That is focus in the Forge framework, an attentional anchor. And what fascinates me about that image is this. The fixed point is not one of the balls. It is a point chosen by the juggler, something that does not demand attention, but organizes it. So the essential question of focus becomes very simple. Among everything competing for my attention right now, what truly deserves my presence? What is important to understand is that the fixed point is not meant to become a rigid life mission frozen forever in place. If it becomes rigid, it eventually turns into another form of drift. Because the truth is, the focus point evolves, as life evolves, as pressure evolves, as identity evolves. At the beginning of drift, people often lose hierarchy completely. Everything feels urgent. Attention fragments. reaction replaces intention. So the first focus point is often immediate and stabilizing. Sometimes it is very concrete, a conversation that has to happen, a decision that has been avoided, a body that has been neglected for too long, a relationship beginning to fracture silently underneath the surface. At that stage, focus acts almost like triage. It reduces internal chaos. I worked with a senior leader who had identified his fixed point early in our work together, a team conflict that had been bleeding energy for months. He resolved it. The relief was real. But 6 months later, he came back, still using that same resolved conflict as his anchor, returning to it mentally as if it still needed tending. The fixed point had done its work. It was no longer the right one. Holding on to it had quietly become its own form of avoidance. But something interesting happens as regulation slowly returns. The nervous system settles. Cognitive bandwidth comes back. The mind regains the ability to think beyond immediate survival. And then the question itself begins to evolve. The person is no longer asking only, "What must I handle right now?" They begin asking, "What actually matters to me? What deserves my energy long term? What kind of leader am I becoming under all this pressure?" The focus point becomes less reactive and more directional. Early focus points often sound like this: fix the crisis, survive the restructuring, reduce the overload. Later, they sound different: protect clarity, preserve depth, stay aligned, remain present to what matters. The person moves from tactical focus towards something deeper, an organizing principle for how they want to live and lead. And paradoxically, the healthier someone becomes, the less rigid the focus point usually becomes as well. The problem in drift is not multiplicity. It is fragmentation without hierarchy. Mature focus allows complexity without losing coherence. The fixed point becomes less like a single object and more like a center of gravity around which everything else can move. And perhaps that is the real evolution of focus. At the beginning, it prevents collapse. Later, it allows fluidity. Think again about the juggler. The beginner stares at the fixed point desperately, trying not to lose control. But the expert no longer looks tense. The fixed point has become natural, almost unconscious. It stabilizes movement without imprisoning it. Finding that point takes honesty, and it takes time. For some people, the answer appears immediately. They already know it. They have simply been avoiding it. For others, it takes several conversations. I remember working with an expat executive during a major restructuring. He told me something striking. "I've been managing noise for so long that I forgot what the signal even was." We worked on that question for nearly an hour. At the end, he arrived at a single sentence, one fixed point. And he said quietly, "I haven't felt this clarity in 2 years." That kind of clarity requires something chronic pressure slowly erodes, the strength to choose. Because focus is not only deciding what matters, it is also accepting that certain things must matter less. And that is where many leaders resist. But there is a difference between dropping responsibilities and recognizing which responsibilities are truly yours to carry. A leader who is fully present to the right things is more effective than a leader attempting to be present to everything. That is not philosophy. It is something I observe consistently in the work. Focus restores presence, and presence is not the same thing as attention. Many people under chronic pressure can still pay attention extremely well. They can analyze, respond, perform. but internally they are no longer fully there. Presence is different. Presence is the capacity to inhabit what we are doing while remaining connected to ourselves, to others, and to the meaning of the moment itself. Attention can be forced. Presence cannot. Focus restores the capacity to direct your attention consciously rather than continuously surrendering it to urgency. And that is why F comes first, because without focus, the rest of the forge movements have no stable ground to build upon. So before returning to your meetings, your inbox, your responsibilities, I want to leave you with one question. Go somewhere quiet, away from the noise for a few minutes, and ask yourself honestly, what is the fixed point? What is the one thing that, if you became fully present to it, would allow the rest of your leadership to organize itself more naturally? Write it down, one sentence. That is your F, your fixed point. I am Alain Coadou. I created the Forge because I believe that what happens before breakdown deserves far more attention than it receives. Drift is not weakness. It is what prolonged pressure does to human beings over time. And perhaps recognizing it early is what allows us not only to sustain performance, but to sustain ourselves. This was Forge Conversations. Thank you for listening.